is a refresher episode because I'm going to be bringing Steve McKenna back. Now, if you don't know Professor Steve McKenna, he is amazing. One of the biggest thinkers in Western Australia who I have had the pleasure of speaking with about performance and development plans. Now, this is one of the most listened to episodes. So here it is for you again in case you've gone through your performance cycle, or if you're planning for it, get ready for this one. Have a pen and paper because I'm telling you, it is full of practical tips. Hello and welcome to this episode of Ways to Change the Workplace with myself, Prina Shah. I love what I do. I'm a global leadership coach, a consultant, a trainer, a keynote speaker, a podcaster. I help you to develop your leaders, your teams, and I help you to optimize your organizational cultures. I'm here to help you find ways to change your workplace. Why? Because we spend more time in our waking day at work than we do with our loved ones. It has to be a good place to be. So in this podcast, you can expect a mix of interviews with amazing thought leaders and then some solo episodes from myself as well. Get ready! I came across yourself, Steve, from an article that you wrote on LinkedIn, and I had to reach out to you. And since then, we've, been emailing, and I'm really pleased to be talking to you today. I have a little bit of an introduction to you. If you'd give me a couple of minutes, so I could introduce you to my audience, Steve.
Thank you.
Beautiful. So welcome to Steve. Steve McKenna is an associate professor in the School of Management and Marketing at Curtin University, which is based in Perth in Western Australia. Steve's career has encompassed corporate, small business startups, consulting, and academia globally. Steve has been all around the world over a span of around 35 years. Steve's areas of expertise are in global human resource management, talent management, work and occupations, leadership development, careers, and the employee experience. Steve, you really speak my language. Steve founded the popular Perth-based HR Disrupted events and bi-monthly HR think tanks. And Steve has developed a network of over 150 HR executives, managers, and professionals from all sectors of the economy and the globe. Steve is currently working with organizations in leadership development, safety culture leadership, and the lived experience of job seekers with disabilities. And over the last year, Steve has worked with international and Curtin colleges on a research project investigating the implications of COVID-19 for people management and on the issues in the use of HR technology. So this is going to be a really fascinating conversation. Steve is a member of many committees, including the Australia-India Management Committee, WH-ACTA, and Steve is a director of the research consultancy No Shortcuts. I love the name, Steve. Steve, I'm going to put your contact details and various article links and whatnot in our show notes. And welcome today.
Thank you very much.
I loved your article, which I've got here. I've got it printed out here. And today I want to talk to you about performance liberation, not performance management. That's the topic. I think I can talk to you about many, many things, but this is the one thing I'd really like to talk to you about. Given that in Australia, we're coming to the end of the financial cycle, and usually within this period, within Australia, we have end of performance cycle appraisals happening at the moment, Steve. So first off, welcome.
Thank you very much, Prina. Thank you very much. Nice to be here.
Thank you. So your article has many, many points, and I've got lots of highlights all over it. One of the things you talk about is to rename the process of performance management to performance liberation. Can you talk to me about why we should rename this process first off, and your thoughts on that.
Okay. Well, just to go back a step, I guess, Prina, one of the problems, as you've indicated, we're coming around to the sort of year-end cycle. People may be going through their annual performance appraisals. And one of the things that is becoming now pretty obvious amongst organizations, businesses, corporations at the cutting edge of performance appraisal is that really the whole idea of the 6-monthly or 12-monthly performance review or appraisal is really unfit for purpose, and for a number of reasons. One reason is many organizations now are thinking that what we need to do is to actually forward think rather than think about the past when it comes to talking to staff about their work rather than just performance itself. So one of the problems we have with performance reviews, in my view, is that it is really a sit-down event once every year where the manager desperately tries to remember how a person has performed over the last year, and the employee will be sitting there, also trying to remember what's happened. And the problem is that one of the issues really is to review the past is, in a sense, a little bit of a mistaken way forward, because we cannot do anything about the past. And it assumes that if we look at the past, we can work with somebody as a manager to improve their performance in the future. But in the modern world, of course, the nature of things is changing on a regular basis. So the idea that we can simply translate what has happened last year, the future is going to be the same as the past, and we can therefore, just look at that performance and change it for the future, is simply not going to work in a world where things change very quickly, everything is fluid and dynamic. A person's objectives may change actually from one day to the next, depending on the circumstances that they're in. So what we've got really is a process that was designed for the kind of industrial age, where things were much more rigid, much more structured, much more kind of stable. And we're trying to use it in a modern digital world where it simply doesn't fit anymore.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Lots of questions for you coming up. So we're talking about a system that's looking at us in terms of past objectives and goals. So we're looking back in time rather than looking forward in time. That's one of the things you talked about. Things have really changed within the workplace, given, pandemic. And I think even without the pandemic, workplaces are working so much faster and there's all sorts of disruption, and we have to just be even more quick to respond to changing needs.
Yes.
So in light of that, you're saying this whole annual cycle process is not fit for purpose in that respect.
That's right. It's not. It's unfit for purpose. And partly also, Prina, is it's unfit for purpose, ironically, in some ways, because it doesn't have a purpose.
Tell me more about that.
What exactly is the purpose of the annual review? Now, in theory, it is to help somebody develop their areas for improvement, and so in the future they can work better. But what exactly is the purpose of that? And there are other things to talk about here, but the connection, for example, between evaluation and compensation and so on. But just to go back to the idea of anything in business has to have, in my view, a very clear purpose. What are we trying to achieve, other than ticking a box, which is we've done the performance review and now we can just carry on doing what we're doing. So the idea that, we have to look very much at not only performance reviews, but the whole performance management system, and ask the question, what exactly is the purpose of having a performance management system? And how does that relate to individual employees? So, for example, I'm very much a believer in a strengths-based management or strengths-based leadership.
Okay.
One of the problems, everybody has strengths, and I think the more that organizations spend time finding out what people's strengths are, you can enhance performance by enhancing a person's strengths. But I don't think you have the same impact if you look at people and want to discuss their weaknesses. Often people are weak or have areas because they don't like doing that. They're not very good at it. And people work better when they have mastery over some aspect of their work. So I think part of performance liberation is to liberate people's strengths rather than managing their weaknesses.
Yeah.
And we can develop people, but if we develop people from a position of weakness, what we get is move them to mediocre performance. If we develop people's strengths and offer them the opportunity to use their strengths, then we can move to exceptional performance. And I think that what we don't spend enough time doing in organizations is trying to liberate people's innate strengths that they feel good about, they have mastery over, they like and enjoy doing, and to focus on trying to develop an area that we think needs improvement when somebody probably is not going to be particularly enjoying that. They don't feel any mastery over it. It's not very stimulating. What we end up doing is simply tinkering around, I think, with performance in order to try to get somebody from poor to mediocre, rather than to focus on let's liberate a person's strengths. What are they good at? What do they want to do? And let's find ways to design work that actually leverages those strengths rather than feature or focus on the disappointments that often people feel when the work that they're doing is not really appealing to them.
Very interesting point. Now, I need to clarify for our audience as well that this is different to managing poor performance. That's a different process altogether. In this conversation, we're talking about an annual cycle of performance management. The name itself just gives people, the heebie-jeebies. And I have to confess, Steve, I'm one of these HR people who has developed many a performance and development plan for many an organization. And having this conversation with you today has just made me thought about, oh my gosh, there's so many elements that can be changed to make the process a more positive process. And in your article, you also talk about this line. Okay, so for the moment, it is enough to note that calling something a performance appraisal or a system, performance management, emphasizes that someone, the boss, will judge someone else's performance. Oh my gosh. So we are creating that positional hierarchy and that positional power structure already in this system without even thinking about it.
Yes. I think the thing is when a manager sits down with an employee, Prina, in this sort of conventional way, it's often less to do about some kind of assessment of performance, and it's really very much about a power relationship. So the manager is in a position to judge, often not very well because they don't have good data to hand anyway. And so the process is often as political as it is rational. And in some ways, and there is an interesting literature out there about the fact that it's a bit of a game. It's a game. It's a sort of negotiation. It's, there's a very highly subjective element of it. And, no matter how much we talk about, well, we need to, train managers to overcome their unconscious biases and subjectivity. We've been talking about that in the 35 years or so I've been in the business of HRM, and nothing has changed. So we have to find some new ways of doing things. And more importantly, I think at the fundamental level, what we have to do as HR people and actually as leaders in businesses is we have to challenge our assumptions about a whole range of HR things, but performance management. What are the assumptions that underpin what we do in performance reviews and in performance management? We have to ask ourselves some questions like, is this system really fit for purpose? or is it just we need to tick the box to say that everybody is sat down with their manager for a conversation that usually avoids everything and deals with nothing, and then we just carry on. And I think that's one of the big issues with performance reviewers. They often avoid everything that needs to be talked about, and they actually deal with nothing.
Yeah. Because they've got that system or the paper to hide behind, so they just go through it in a robotic fashion and job done for this year.
Yeah, and you will know as well as I do, working in all kinds of organizations as an employee and, of course, as a manager and a leader, when myself, I can speak to having gone through these exercises in the past as let's just get this thing out of the way and get on with it. And that's just a waste of time, and it adds no value. It doesn't create value for an organization.
Yeah. So another thing you talk about in relation to this current system and this current way of working, you talk about dangling the carrot less and detaching rewards from evaluations also. Could you expand on what that means and what you talk about there, please, Steve?
Yeah, one of the things that's built in, I think, to the kind of conventional performance review is we have to end up as a sort of manager or an organization with a kind of bell curve. Yep. There's a few here at this end that are good. There's a few at the bottom that are not so good, and everybody else basically is around the average. But there's some really good research out there that tells us that essentially 5 to 10% of people in an organization will probably be doing 400% of the work. In other words, it's not really a bell curve; it's more of a sort of hockey stick.
Yeah.
Yeah, you've got everybody sort of here, and then at the end you've got a spike of people. And some of the research has indicated very clearly that most managers in organizations actually instinctively know who their best performers are. So when you look at some of the companies like Google and so on, they pay their high performers really, really well compared with everybody else because they identify that it's a hockey stick, not a bell curve. There's a lot of people that perform well, and then there's a few who are just hugely exceptional. So the problem with the whole performance review process and the ranking and rating is it's kind of inbuilt, is designed that it should be a bell curve.
Yeah.
And then when we do it, if we even think about doing it in a meaningful way as a manager, we end up being driven by, okay, I've got to create a sort of bell curve here. I've got to identify a small group that are not so good. I've got to identify a group that are good, but really everybody's going to be in the middle. And so again, it's an assumption that we make. We assume that everybody is really gathered around the average. But when we start to look at it in detail, we find that actually that's not it. And that's not the way that it happens in many organizations. There are going to be those few people who are really performing, and everybody else is doing, what they need to do for whatever reason. So to begin with, the whole idea that we should start to think about this kind of ranking and rating around the middle is and the simple issue here, Prina, is we simply have to ask questions about systems like performance management, which test our assumptions.
Yeah.
If we assume everybody's around the average, everybody will be around the average. And so, we can only disrupt the kinds of things we do in HR generally or in performance management specifically if we start to question those assumptions.
Yeah.
And then beyond that, innovate and experiment with some new ways of thinking about performance.
Yeah. I want to ask you about innovations in a sec, but before I do, you also in this article, you talked about values and behaviors and how within this performance and development cycle, how they too are subjective to be measured, really.
Yes. Well, that's my view. I've had many conversations, of course, with people about that.
Yeah.
And another issue, of course, in my view, that's happened with performance and management is, it started off, I think, being what's the connection we can make between performance and doing a performance review and connecting it to compensation. And then somebody had the idea, well, we need to do more in a performance review. We need to think about rating people, but we also need to think about developing people. So let's have two purposes. The purpose is their performance. The second purpose is to develop them. And then subsequently, we've got now situations where, well, we have to also evaluate people on whether they are behaving according to our organizational values.
Yes.
And then from that, you get things like competencies, and then, what behaviors do we expect people to, and so on. Now, all of those things to me are things which are very, very difficult to actually judge objectively. Now, that may or may not in itself be a problem. I mean, I know people who ask the question, what's wrong with subjectivity? And in some way, it's, I kind of have some sympathy with that argument. But, if an organization has a set of values, for example, respect or courage or, or excellence, who is the judge of that ultimately? And the judge of that is going to be the manager.
Yes.
So the problem is the manager becomes the arbiter of whether you as an employee behave in a respectful way, and that opens up all kinds of cans of worms, in my view, because it gives all the power to the manager. If the manager believes you have not acted respectfully in your behaviors, then you're in trouble.
It's subjective. Very much so. And the other thing I have found, Steve, also with some organizations, through my career thus far, is they'll have their beautiful, sexy values up there, posters, whatever, but they haven't actually defined the behaviors that sit beneath them. So the one that does my head in the most, a value of innovation. What the hell does that mean? For example.
Yeah, that's right. And sometimes to be innovative, you have to be courageous. And also, to be honest, sometimes, to be innovative in organizations that are sort of kind of a little bit risk averse, perhaps more bureaucratic, you're obviously going to be pushing in areas and sometimes pushing people to do things that they may not want to do. So how then do we balance the need to be innovative or courageous and this issue about being respectful or and so on, and so we get into a very difficult area where if an individual feels that you are being disrespectful, that perception then becomes very important. And I agree with that to some extent. But, who is to judge that? If every individual has the right to say, you've been disrespectful to me, then we're in a dangerous sort of area there because, it becomes then sort of just, it's a relativistic concept, And the problem, to go back to your initial point, is I'm not sure how we can accurately define a behavior such that it can be subject to some objective evaluation.
Yep.
And so that's why I think, when it comes to issues like values and so on, to include those into a performance review process is, to me, it's a very problematic aspect. But one of the things I think that, in terms of one of the problems also is just the use of the word performance.
Yeah.
When we look at organizations, I think what we need people to be doing in the work that they do is to create value creation.
Yeah.
And that's a much broader concept than performance, and so in the performance evaluation system, or the performance liberation system, we should be focusing on, how do people working together create value for the organization?
Yeah.
Because, again, the performance process tends to be individualized.
Yes.
And in organizations, nobody acts alone.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah. So even those, really high performers at one end, they wouldn't be high performers, without the
others, yeah.
the framework, the structure, the other people that exist in an organization. So
yeah. And if we were to talk organizational culture now, this really talks to that so hugely, in that if we're talking about how I can add value to an organization, it shows that clear line of sight for me to how I fit into that bigger picture, because that's often the missing piece when it comes to disengaged employees, as you know also. I'm disengaged. I don't know how the hell I fit in here, all of that. So if we redefine this whole process from the ground up and based on, our current assumptions, that would be really different. And
absolutely.
To that point you made about values as well. I know of one organization I've been working with who they have their values, but then they have rolled it out per every single team to work out what these signature values mean for you as a team. Because, hello, the sales team, their definition of excellence compared to a customer services team's definition of excellence are two different things altogether. So that they have that collective language with their manager to say, okay, this is what excellence is for me.
Yeah, absolutely, Prina. I agree with you, and it's to me, it's kind of it's parallel to. For me again, very importantly, I believe that the more things are decentralized, the better it is. So if we take a society, I believe that democracy should filter down to the lowest possible level, so people take control over their own lives. And I think in organizations, it's exactly the same. To go back to your example, instead of expecting every individual to conform to, 4 or 5 values, and they're ultimately sort of judged by the bosses, if we give every team the right and the opportunity to say, okay, you're working as this team, perhaps on a project for a period of time, but during that period of time, you decide how these values, what they mean to you.
Yeah.
And that's absolutely, and I think that is absolutely the way that we need to be thinking about how relevant the idea of, values are. Because, for example, 2 people or a group of people can enjoy, a word that's kind of important to me is in organizations, it's good to have a group of people who have banter with each other. Banter, whatever you call it, banter or irony or sarcasm. But sometimes people get together and they do that instinctively.
Yes.
Now, somebody entering that space might think, oh, this, you speak to each other in that kind of way. That's terrible. But of course, it works for those people who buy into banter as a value.
Yes.
We enjoy banter, and that's, it can be a sign of respectfulness. It can be, but if that group of people define it for themselves, then nobody else should come in and say, oh, you're not, so, things like that are really important for organizations to experiment with and to embrace.
Exactly. When I'm talking with a lot of my clients who are CEOs, I often ask them, and it's, about us changing our language as consultants also. So one of the questions I ask them when I'm working on these kind of things is, how would you like your employees to act like the owner of the organization? That then just changes their mindset altogether, and it's questioning assumptions, in the respect that you're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's, that's the whole questioning assumptions, of course, is really part of that whole double loop learning process, which, we can only really learn in a double loop rather than a single loop way when we actually ask questions about what assumptions are we making on which we are basing our actions and decisions. And there are so many opportunities to do that in organizations, to just to embed the questioning of assumptions into the way in which not only managers, but obviously employees as well go about doing their work. There are so many things that are hidden, so many elephants in the room in organizations. a few years ago when I started my corporate career, if I can just tell you this little story, I was very influenced by the work of Chris Argyris, who was an American, academic at Harvard. And he developed this little strategy, which basically was left hand and right hand thinking. And he said, and I watched him once facilitate a session, a board session. And when I was in the US, and he basically a line down one side of the paper, on the left-hand side, which is what was actually being said, or what exactly an individual said, and on the right hand was what they were thinking. And the really neat, it's a very simple challenge, but of course what they were saying was very different from what they were thinking. And his point to the, in that facilitated session to them was, you need to find a way of saying what you are thinking, rather than saying what you think you should be saying. And basically that was the whole message there, was about questioning assumptions.
Brilliant.
Let's get things on the table that need to be talked about, rather than constantly trying to find a way of, circumventing them and this kind of stuff. Yeah.
Steve, have you seen or do you know of any case studies or organizations who are doing things differently in terms of performance liberation? So you've talked about that hockey stick from Google. Any other examples or case studies you may have?
Yeah, well, there are a lot of things that are happening in organizations that are, as you'd expect, state of the art. The big companies, the Googles, the General Electrics, the Gaps, and so on. Many things that companies are doing now, which obviously HR technology is becoming increasingly important.
Yep.
And we've moved on, when it was obviously only HR payroll that was using technology. Now pretty much everything in the HR space is open to technology. And so some companies now are using apps and technology to gather real-time data on performance. So a very simple example is if an employee is giving a presentation, immediately after that presentation, people who are in the audience can obviously use an app and they can grade that presentation immediately. It was a great presentation, your slide deck was fantastic, whatever it is.
Yeah.
So and in organizations, it's basically, obviously, it's called crowdsourcing. What we are doing is, from as many touch points as possible, we are getting feedback on what people are doing as they are doing it, or just after they've done it. So you have a team meeting and people spend, 20 seconds, great team meeting, good input from, and this kind of. So what you're doing, instead of course, having this annual review where nobody can remember anything that happened, a week ago, let alone a year ago, we've got data that's being collected all the time in real time. So, it's part of this whole data analytics thing where we can gather information about somebody's performance immediately. They know what it is, they can see it, and they can, instantly so you've got a kind of real-time coach.
Brilliant.
Partly through technology,
Yep.
but also, of course, the older feeling, people have got to be regularly conversing with their bosses. They've got to be talking about things on a, coaching level.
Yeah.
But the really important thing today is how, and it will become more important as it is in HR generally, technology, the use of technology, the use of apps, and so on, in the collection of data about performance is really, going to be important. And it does two things. One, I still emphasize the importance that strengths, we need to focus on strengths and developing them in the future rather than developing weaknesses from the past. But secondly, we kind of democratize the process of performance management by giving people the apps. And so everybody is, and not in necessarily a critical way, sometimes just in a playful way, but all of the time collecting data about how people are performing.
Yes.
And instead of waiting for the boss to sit down with you and tell you what you're doing wrong, which is, of course, usually what happens. People come out of performance reviews feeling pretty demoralized generally. We actually are allowing everybody to have an input, which is which is kind of 360 degree, but technologized, made more, relevant, more immediate.
And so timely, exactly. And you talk in your last paragraph, you talk about the culture of continuous improvement and the whole employee experience. We're talking employee experience now. It's the whole life cycle of the employee. It's that continuous improvement element. And me, if I was, in a workplace again, in a corporate job again, I would like that continual feedback rather than, the formalized once every year or once every 6 months. You need that, especially if you're going to keep up with the pace of change.
Yeah, absolutely. And the most important thing, again, another important thing for me, Prina, is that we should prevent poor performance, not try to cure it. And we prevent that through ensuring that the employee experience, the employee journey, is positive. So, for example, research tells us that if a person has a very bad onboarding process, they're likely to leave the organization within 6 months. So, and that's everything from before they're an employee, how they're treated during the, interview process and so on. And how companies now, and they still, and certainly here in everywhere in the world, but I've come across just talking to a lot of people who are in the job search process, they get no feedback, no contact at all from an organization, and so these are very simple things that can be done, and they're of such huge reputational value for organizations, and it's amazing that small things like that, which are part of the employee experience, even if you're not hiring that person, are so important, and so, poor performance can be, or below par performance can be prevented if we start to focus on the whole of this employee journey, and so that a person feels a sense of belonging right from the beginning.
That's it.
And even if they are rejected, they still think, well, that company contacted me and gave me great feedback, so
that experience stays with you. Yeah. And people talk.
Absolutely. Yeah. So,
through reviews online, through Glassdoor reviews, all of that, and the company's reputation, brand, the employee value proposition, all of the above, all of the good stuff. Okay.
Yeah.
I think we need to have another conversation. I'd love to catch up for a coffee another time. But before we finish, I have one question that I ask everyone, Steve. If you had a magic wand, what is one thing you would do to change the way of the workplace?
This is probably not entirely controversial, but I would democratize workplaces. I would get to, all kinds of, as we talked earlier, get everything as much as possible down to the team level, because, things get done in organizations ultimately by teams, not by individuals.
Yeah.
People working together is what creates value. And so I would say, democratize workplaces as much as is absolutely possible, and give the feeling that, and enhance belonging through people's sense of being in control, mastery of their working environment.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for your time, Steve.
Not a problem.
And if anyone wants to get in touch with you, I'll put all of your details in the show notes. And other conversations to be continued.
Okay, we'll catch up soon.
Absolutely.
Thanks for tuning in. Check out the show notes and join my Ways to Change Your Workplace Facebook group. It's full of useful material. Ciao for now.